Greetings all Sioux High AP Biology students. This is Mr. McLeod again. Welcome to the next series of podcasts on our next huge topic in AP Biology, evolution. In this series of podcasts, we will attempt to explain what is meant by the term evolution and how this theory has, no pun intended, evolved over the past couple hundred years or so. We will address some important questions like who first suggested evolution and who first suggested creationism and what did humans evolve from. Now it's really important for all of you to understand that I'm not here to argue against anyone's religious beliefs. In this class we will focus on the ideas of evolution and the scientific evidence for evolution. But ultimately, it's up to you to decide your own beliefs. Natural selection and evolution are a model for explaining observations that have yet to be disproven. It's my goal to provide you with as much current scientific evidence as possible so that you can continue to evaluate any new discoveries in the field of evolution and make informed judgments about their validity. Let's take a quick look at how the Western view of the theory of evolution evolved. See what I did there? Plato and Aristotle viewed species as discrete, perfect, and designed, which fit perfectly with the Old Testament idea that a creator designed all animals and placed them on earth. Write that down. Now a bit about taxonomy. Taxonomy originated before evolution. Now, taxonomy is the idea that similar species were grouped together on a basis of similar characteristics and ancestors. So get that down in your notes. I'd also like you to get this diagram in your notes. And I'd like it to be as accurate as possible. We'll refer back to this diagram in class many times, so make sure it's exactly like you see it in this slide. Now a word about the concept of geologic gradualism. Geologic gradualism influenced Darwin heavily. This is the idea that the world is shaped slowly and continuously and that the earth is much older than 6,000 years. Also get that in your notes. Most people believe that Darwin was the first scientist to suggest evolution. That'd be incorrect. That distinction goes to a guy named Jean-Baptiste Lamarck that you see here in this slide. Lamarck noticed similarities between fossil species and current species and speculated that there was a relationship. Lamarck's theory had 4 basic concepts that you need to get down in your notes. And not because they're all correct, because they're not. Remember, we're exploring how the modern theory of evolution evolved. See what I did there? Did I already say that? Alright. First, Lamarck believed that evolution was a natural progression towards perfection. Get that in your notes. Secondly, he believed that organisms proceeded up some kind of a ladder from simple bacteria to complex organisms. Also write that down. Thirdly, Lamarck believed that parts of an organism that are used grow bigger and bigger. Those that are not disappear or diminish. Write that down. And lastly, Lamarck believed that these acquired characteristics could be passed on to their offspring. So get that down as well. Let's look at the classic example of Lamarckian evolution, the giraffe. When giraffes first appeared on the earth, they had short necks. Can you guess why? If you said it's because that's where the food was located, You'd be correct. However, over time the lower hanging food source disappeared. Because of this environmental change, Lamarck believed that each giraffe stretched and stretched, making his or her neck longer in order to reach the higher food source. Lamarck also believed that somehow this trait could be passed on to their offspring so that eventually all giraffes had long necks like they do today. What you need to do is to find a way to summarize this example in your notes, because we'll be referring back to it a lot when we compare it to Darwin's theory. So do that right now. Now, while Lamarck's theory was interesting, we now know that that's not really how it works. But it was an important first big stab at the concept nonetheless. Good enough to get a book published on the subject that you see right here. What Lamarck did do was to develop the ideas of adaptation and heritability that we'll be talking about later. Write those down. Okay, so let's talk a bit more about Charles Darwin. Darwin went to medical school at the age of 16, but dropped out and did what any aspiring scientist at the time would do. He tried to join the clergy, meaning he tried to become a priest. While that didn't work out for him, a priest did get him a job on the HMS Beagle that you see here on the right. The Beagle was an early scientific research vessel you see pictured here next to CD himself. This vessel traveled to South America and the Galapagos Islands, and its job was to collect plants and animals from all over the continent. It was this work that allowed Darwin to begin gaining fame as a naturalist. Now, Darwin made 3 important observations in his research in South America, and you need to get these in your notes. First, that species in South America were related yet distinctly different from European species. Write that down. Secondly, Darwin saw that the South American fossils didn't match the European fossils. Also write that down. And lastly, Darwin observed that the South American fossils were related to South American species, implying some sort of descent. Write that down. Okay, now let's focus on Darwin's observations in the Galapagos Islands, which are a small group of islands off the coast of South America. Darwin found unique species that were related to mainland species, and each different island had different varieties of a species. Write that down. For instance, Darwin noticed each island had a unique finches that seemed perfectly suited to their own habitat. Get that in your notes. Darwin reasoned that the gradual accumulation of adaptations to an environment could lead to new species over long periods of time. Also write that down. Interestingly, Darwin sat on this work for a period of 7+ years. Therefore, the first work explaining evolution by adaptation was not published by Darwin, but by a guy named Alfred Wallace. However, Wallace's work led to Darwin's groundbreaking book called The Origin of Species. Write both of these facts down. It's also worth mentioning that a scientific theory is an explanation or model used to explain observations or experimental results about an observed phenomenon. Write that down. Now, theories are not haphazard guesses. A theory must survive scientific scrutiny, experimentation, and review, i.e. the theory of gravity. Theories are very different from a hypothesis in that there is evidence to back up a theory, whereas a hypothesis is simply a prediction that has not been experimented on. In your notes, you need to be able to make a distinction between a theory and a hypothesis, so go ahead and do that now. Now, in Darwin's case, his theory of evolution caught on very quickly among biologists, mainly because Darwin had incredible amounts of evidence and a very logical and coherent theory based on that evidence. Darwin was also a well-respected naturalist, and as a result, he was much luckier than Copernicus or Galileo, and demonstrates the importance of strong, well-documented research and showing your work. Now, the two major features of The Origin of Species, Darwin's book, I want you to get in your notes are 1. Descent with modification, write that down, and 2. Natural selection. These are Darwin's main mechanisms for evolution, so get this in your notes. Okay, let's look at descent with modification first. There are 3 main points you need to know to understand this concept. First, Darwin believed that all species originated from a single species. Write that down. Secondly, he believed that over time, slight modifications in offspring lead to all of the diversity found on Earth today. Also get that down. And that thirdly, this diversity led to the development of the tree of life you see here in this slide. Now, it's important to note the bottom of that tree is a gram-positive bacteria. Evolutionists believe that all life evolved from those original gram-positive bacteria. So also get that down in your notes. What's really interesting is that unknowingly, Linnaeus' theories on taxonomy supported Darwin's theory. What this means is that organisms can be grouped based on common ancestors, and that more similar organisms are likely to be more closely related. Get that down in your notes. Also, if you're not familiar with Linnaeus' system of kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species, let's get this example in your notes, the one in the slide right here. So kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. And then on the right-hand side now are all of those that relate to the cat that you see here, which is looks like it's a leopard, but it could be a panther. Panthers are black, I think, but still in the same family. So if you're not familiar with that, go ahead and get that in your notes. Natural selection becomes Darwin's main focus. His mechanism. In many scientists' opinion, this is the most important theory in all of science. Let's look at some important observations Darwin made about natural selection. Okay, observation 1. Species would increase in population exponentially if every individual reproduced successfully. Write that down. Observation number 2. Populations tend to remain relatively stable. Also get that down. And the third observation is that resources in the environment are limited and cannot support unlimited growth. Write that down. Now the inference here, and one that's really important that you should really understand when we talk about natural selection, is that there is a struggle for survival and reproduction, and that not everyone succeeds. Wait, did I say 3 observations? I meant 5. So let's talk about observation number 4. Darwin believed that individuals within a population are slightly different. Write that down. And lastly, observation number 5, Darwin believed that many of those differences are heritable or able to be passed on from one generation to another. So also write that down. Now the inference here is that somehow survival and reproduction depend on genetic traits, and that traits that help an organism survive and reproduce are more likely to become common in a population. Write those 2 things down. What this means is that somehow nature selects which genes or traits become common. So let's give a short, brief summary of natural selection. Natural selection says that traits that help organisms survive changes in their environment and reproduce become more common. Write that down. Now, it's important to remember that this is only true on traits that are already present in an organism. So organisms can't change traits that they don't have. For example, short-necked giraffes cannot become long-necked giraffes. They either were short necks or they were long necks. So those traits were already present. And because of this, populations change over time. Make sure you get that down. Now, I'd also like you to get this down in your notes, which is a comparison between Darwin and Lamarck. So I'd like you to make 2 columns and get each one of these down so that you can refer back to it when we're talking about the difference. Now, we've been talking about natural selection. Let's just mention now artificial selection, something we've seen happening with dog breeding for a long time. Breeders find certain traits that they like, and they keep those in the dog, and they find traits that they don't like, and they don't allow those traits to enter the gene pool. So it seems reasonable that natural selection can change species over a longer period, because we've seen artificial selection do it in a short period of time. So make sure you get that down in your notes. Now, Darwin saw natural selection as slow and gradual, meaning over many thousands of generations, small changes led to significant evolution. Write that down. Darwin also believed that evolution took millions of years and is constant, that species are always evolving at a steady rate. Make sure you get that down as well. These are probably the 2 most debated parts of evolution. Now, just a couple subtleties of natural selection. It's important for you to get these down in your notes. Natural selection does not create new traits. In other words, it doesn't make a short-necked giraffe become a long-necked giraffe. Short necks are short necks, long necks are long necks. Secondly, only those traits that are heritable, that can be passed on, are under the influence of natural selection. And third, it's not about individuals trying to survive. The individual has nothing to do with it. If their environment changes, i.e., the food source gets taller, the short-necked giraffes are simply out of luck. There's nothing they can do. And the long-necked giraffes are the ones that nature selected. So it isn't like they have a choice. It's almost like it's the luck of the draw type thing. Now a second mention about Darwin's finches that you can see here in this slide. Now again, Darwin's believed that the different beaks were suited for different types of seeds. And you can see the different beaks here in this picture. And that each beak type became common in an area where those seeds were found, which makes sense. Natural selection didn't create the beaks, but the seeds in that particular area were more suited for a particular kind of beak. So those beaked finches survived and passed on those traits, and the others did not. Very simple situation. Again, you could see it as a luck of the draw. If you had the beak that was shaped for those seeds, you survived and got to pass on your traits. If you didn't, you died. Or you moved to somewhere else. This is a good time to mention where new traits come from. You should know by now they come from mutations. And you can see several different kinds of mutations in this slide. Mutations are spontaneous, accidental changes in an organism's DNA. Write that down. Now, it's very rare that mutations are beneficial, but that does sometimes happen. Now, new traits can also come from new combinations of existing genes. So get that down in your notes as well. It's also important to note that natural selection is well documented. There's very little scientific debate that natural selection actually occurs. As we mentioned earlier, the questions are more on how quickly it occurs and if other mechanisms can cause evolution. But natural selection is not in question anymore. It's definitely a part of the evolution process. So make sure you get that in your notes. Now, you also hear the term survival of the fittest batted around a lot in biology. Let's clear this up. The word fit means most capable of reproduction, so get that in your notes. It doesn't mean bigger, stronger, faster, smarter. Remember, the organism has no choice. It's either suited for the environment or fit, or it's not. So the survival of most fit genes is what we're talking about. Always remember the giraffe example. So the giraffe didn't choose to have a long or a short neck. It either had the long neck or it had the short neck. It was either fit or it wasn't fit for its environment. Okay, that's it. Let's move on. This is the first of our evolution podcasts. Make sure now you go to the questions located on Moodle and answer those and submit them when you're done, and that you bring your notes up so that I can see them. Talk to you soon.